So let's take a look at how we add and subtract fractions with each other. Now, to do this, you are going to need to know really well how to represent fractions in their equivalencies by finding the lowest common denominator. So if you haven't actually learnt that or need some practice on that, please see the previous video first. However, we've got a couple of problems in front of me and just one example of how we add fractions and another example of how we subtract them. Now, when we're adding fractions together, the first thing we need to check is, do they have a common denominator? If they don't have a common denominator, then we need to make them have a common denominator first. If they do have a common denominator, great, we can move on to the next step, all right, which I'll go through in a sec. But these two clearly don't have a common denominator, so I've got to go, well, what is the lowest number that 5 and 9 both divide into? Okay, in this case, we know they both divide into 45. So we've got to represent 4/5 with a denominator of 45. All right, oops, let's use something other than red. So we've got to represent 4/5 with a denominator of 45. And we've got to do the same with our 7/9. All right, now I've got to look at this value just here and go, okay, what would I need to multiply 5 to get to 45? Now, I know that I need to multiply that by 9 to get there. So it means I've got to multiply the top of my fraction by 9 as well. So 4 times 9, well, that's going to be 36. So that's what 4/5 is equivalent to in terms of 40/5. We do the same with this one, except this one I'm not going to multiply by 9 because 9 times 9 is 81. To get from 9 to 45, I've got to multiply by 5, which means I need to multiply the 7 by 5. And 5 7s are 35. Okay, so now what we've got is we've got equivalent denominators. Now, if we start with equivalent denominators, we don't need to do this step, but if you don't, then you need to do this step. Once we have equivalent denominators, what we can now do is keep the denominator the same, all right, because we've divided our two objects essentially into 40/5. But we add the numerators because we got 36 of them here. We got 35 of them here, which is going to be 71 in total. All right. And yes, this is an improper fraction. If I need it as a mixed fraction, I can convert it. But what we've now done is successfully added these two fractions together. On a side note, we should actually check to see whether or not this simplifies. Okay. Now, I'm just looking at 71 and 45. Obviously, even numbers won't go into the 71, and I'm just quickly running through, like, there's not going to be any numbers off the top of my head that I think will divide into both 71 and 45, so we've kind of got this in simplest form, I believe, already. But, essentially the process, make sure the denominators are the same. If they're not, get them to be the same. Once you've got them the same, keep the denominator what it is, and add the numerators together, and then check to see whether it simplifies to finish. Now, when we're subtracting fractions, we follow a very similar process. The first thing we have to do they have a common denominator? If they do, great, we can move on to the next step. Here, they don't as well, all right? So the first step is we need to represent these fractions in their equivalencies with a common denominator. So 2/3 and 3/5. We need to look for a number that 3 and 5 divide into. I can see 15's probably the lowest one. All right. So we got 15 here, minus and 15 here. So to get 3 to 15, I'd need to multiply by 5. So it means I need to multiply the 2 by 5, which is going to be 10. We also need to look at this one. So 5 to 15, we need to multiply it by 3. So we need to multiply the top by 3, which is 9. Okay. And now what we do is we keep the denominator the same, and we subtract the numerators. So we go 10, subtract 9, which will leave us with 1 left over, which is 1/15. Now, you should at this point just double check to see whether you can't simplify this. Now, I know because my numerator is already 1 that this won't simplify any further, so that's my final solution. But just to summarize, whenever you're adding and subtracting fractions, they need to have a common denominator. If they don't have a common denominator, you need to represent those fractions with a common denominator. Once you've done that, then you either add or subtract the numerators.